what happens when you have a lot of locally stored files, but you want to back them up somewhere. You want to save them somewhere else. Maybe we can just use git, right? Just git add, git commit, git push, done. I don't have to worry about it. But what if these files are large and you don't want to set up git LFS? Or what if they're not really scripts that need to be version controlled at all? You don't care about the versioning history. You just need a separate place to back up your files to just make sure they don't just all disappear one day. Well, one of the options that we can do is we can mount a remote file system using SSHFS. This is a fantastic tool, and what it'll do is create a fake mount that's on your remote directory. It'll actually pull that remote directory to your local machine, and it'll pretend like that directory exists on your local machine. You can CD into it, you can LS into it, you can write, read, whatever from it. It's a great tool. There is one caveat. You need to have good internet connection in order for this to work well. Because when you CD into this mounted directory, you will essentially be sending commands across your network and then trying to get the output back across the network. And if you've ever worked with this workflow before and have ever had bad internet connection while doing it, I know I have, you can see a very large delay for simple commands such as ls, right? And say there's 10 files in there, but your internet just hit a hiccup. You could be sitting there waiting for 5 minutes until your response comes back and it finishes and you see the output. Or even worse, you're trying to change directory and then all of a sudden your computer just says, yeah, that directory doesn't exist anymore. Uh-oh. So SSHFS is great if you have a local external file system, maybe on a local network, right, that you're hooked into, so you don't have those types of internet or air-gapped hiccups. What we can also do is we can SCP for secure copy. We can copy files from a local machine, push it out to a remote machine, and even bring it back. And so when we do this, we make a directory, or we make two directories, one called local, one called remote. These are both existing locally. Pipe some data into a file into the local directory. So from local, there's a file called data. And then I push that or copy it over to the remote side. And then I can even copy it back from the remote side into my from remote folder. Right? And I made this originally locally, but there wasn't any data in it before. And then what happens, I'll run a tree on both of these directories, and then I'll run a diff on both of the files in both of these directories, and we can see that the file is the same. So I successfully created a file locally, pushed it remotely, or copied it to a remote source, a remote server, and then I pulled it back into a different location on my local system, and then I diffed them both on my local system. Bam, they're the same, so my SCP worked. Another tool we can use to accomplish a very similar task is rsync. The difference between rsync is that SCP is just a straight unidirectional copy. Done. No other fancy features, right? It's just very bare bones, gets the job done. rsync will actually take a folder that you have locally, and it will check the matched remote directory, and it'll say, okay, what's already in this remote source? Okay, so that's in it, and then it'll check the modification time, it'll check the checksums, and then it'll take that information back to your local folder, and it'll do the same thing on all of those local files. And if it detects that some of the files are the exact same, it deduces, well, if they're the exact same, I don't need to copy them. So it will actually just copy what it needs to in order to work. So it'll just send files that do not exist on the remote source in order to copy your files over. There's also a very neat flag you can give, --delete, I believe. And if it detects any files on the remote source that do not exist on your local source, it'll say, well, we must have deleted this from the local, so they shouldn't exist anymore on the remote. And obviously this is an opt-in feature because that's not always desirable. Lastly, we can mimic this a little bit with SCP, so I don't want to count it out totally, but we can recursively copy everything. So if we wanted to synchronize a folder, we can recursively copy to it. This does not allow us to do the same kind of deleting action that I just discussed with rsync, but it's very powerful in itself. And rsync doesn't just work for specific files. We can synchronize entire directories across a network, thus making this a fantastic tool for backing up your files. So, my thoughts on it. rsync is the clear winner for me. SCP is just a very simple, right? I don't really need to know the syntax of anything. I just want an SCP, and it looks just like CP, except it's a remote destination. But rsync does allow you a little bit more flexibility in what you're copying over, and importantly, it will perform the minimal number of actions needed, and it'll transfer the minimal amount of data needed. Rsync also runs really well as a background task, so if you just want to synchronize things, every couple of hours, you can set that up very easily. SSHFS has a little bit different design behind it, but it's still a very powerful tool. Like I said, if you're on a local area network and you're hardwired in, you can just mount that thing. Very easy, done. You don't need to worry about synchronizing because it's just pointing to the same directory.